Hello there, everybody, and welcome to today's live podcast recording for the Expedition to Soul podcast. I'm Sara, the founder of the Sisters Enchanted, and this week we are going to look at self-sabotage. I want you to think for a minute what self-sabotage what does that mean to you? Like, what does self-sabotage mean to you? I'm sure you've heard the word. It's also kind of like a buzz word, that people just use all the time. Like, oh, I'm self-sabotaging. But I mean, what does it really mean to you? And also, I would love for you to consider how you might have an idea of what self-sabotage looks like. And maybe that's not exactly what self-sabotage looks like. As I said, this is the live podcast recording of the Expedition to Soul podcast. I'm very excited to be here with everybody today. Here at the Sisters Enchanted, we believe in intention, intuition, and everyday magic. And part of that intention is working with the moon, and part of intuition is working with the moon, and also understanding self-sabotage. Now, the moon, let's start there. And then we're going to get back into the self-sabotage piece. I still invite you to consider, though, what does self-sabotage mean to you? And how do you usually think of self-sabotage and what it is? If you're watching this live, I should also tell you, we have some team members in the comments today who are helping you out. So if you see anybody sign their name with Team TSE, we've got Christina in here. We've got, I believe, Anna's coming in here. We've always got magic mentors and alum helping us out. I see Amber Liskey in here. Amber is helping us out. Lots of great folks to help you answer any questions that I miss or don't see or just can't quite get to on this day. All right, the moon. That's where we're going with this to get going. The moon, as you may know, is a very, very magical tool. It's a very powerful magical tool. And the reason that it's so powerful and so magical is that the moon invites us to be present in the current rhythm, wherever we are in our cyclical life, in our way of being. The moon invites us to pay attention to that. The reason for this is because the moon is going through its own rhythm. It's living in a rhythm. It's living in a cycle. So the lunar phases, there are 8 lunar phases, 8 typical lunar phases you'll hear about. And these phases alternate between active and passive sort of phases. So the energy of a lunar cycle is always ebbing and flowing. It's like ride the wave and then just like sit for a bit. Ride the wave and sit for a bit. The moon, as you see in the sky, for 2 weeks, the moon grows. It grows, it gets bigger. Now, it's not really getting bigger. It's the way the light is shining on it, right? The light from the sun. But from what we perceive, the moon is getting bigger. And then for 2 weeks, the moon shrinks back. It's getting smaller again. Within these 2-week parts, we can break this down to the 8 lunar phases, which is a bit too much for us to get into here today. But as I said, they alternate from active to passive phases, and there are 8 of them. When we drill down into this growing and then into this releasing, or this like shedding, the getting smaller, we're getting bigger and then we're getting smaller. That's kind of the big overview of the moon, though, is that we're going from this growing to shedding, growing to receiving, calling into receiving, right? When we work with the moon phases and we understand them and we pay attention to them, we're called to pay attention to our own lives and see where in our own energetic patterns of growing and receiving, sometimes in relationship to the moon, sometimes not, we can see where we might be self-sabotaging. And doing this over time, we can see energetic patterns where maybe there's a certain part of our own hormonal cycle or the moon phases where we are more prone to self-sabotage than we are in others. And this can help us to create whatever it is we want to create in our lives. You might use the word manifesting, receiving, creating, dreaming, like whatever the word is that you use. Knowing these energetic patterns, though, can help us to create things in our lives faster because we can see where it is that we might need more rest or where we might need to step away because we're about to self-sabotage. Now, that's a little bit on the moon there and the phases of the moon. I'm going to show you a lunar tracker. Some of you who are in our programs, y'all have you all have the full lunar tracker, but I'm going to show you a page that we've been giving out as one of our free Season of the Witch gifts. We gave it out in the email several times last week, so I'll show that to you in a little bit, and how to actually do this, like how to tangibly do this on paper. But let's talk about self-sabotage for a moment here. I invited you a few minutes ago to consider self-sabotage and what self-sabotage looks like to you. If you don't know, I wrote a book called Magical Self-Care. And one of the things we talk about is how self-care can sometimes actually be self-sabotage. And you're like, that is weird, Sarah. Why would you say that? Self-care is important. Self-care is not selfish, all of those things. Well, stick with me here. So much of what we do that we think is good for us is actually some form of sabotage. Like when we, I love to use the example of drinking like 3 glasses of wine to relax at the end of the day, right? You might be like, that's my self-care. I know a lot of women who call it their mom juice, which, if that's what you say, that's what you say. But like, it's that kind of, it's like a thing I do to unwind and for myself. I see it with shopping. I see it with just buying stuff for the house that you don't really need, whatever it is. And I'm all for buying this, like I'm all for buying things that make you feel great. I'm looking at this more of what are you doing to, like, you're justifying it as a self-care thing, but it's really not getting you where you want to go. And so we self-sabotage. I think we think of it as like completely breaking down or not doing what we want to do or like just not getting started. But self-sabotage is actually the small things that we're doing every day to keep us from getting somewhere. So that might be drinking 3 glasses of wine when you're trying to lower your blood pressure. Like that's not actually helping you. That might be like buying the new, like a whole new, I don't know, like furniture when you're trying to invest money in education or something, but you're like, well, I'll feel better if I buy the furniture. And maybe you will. I don't know. I'm not here to say you won't. I think you have to identify these patterns for yourself. But we also do this as like, I'd love to maybe like enroll in a course. We teach online courses, but I feel like I'm just not ready yet. Or I feel like I have to know something specific before I can enroll, like before I'm good enough to enroll. Or self-sabotage could be not asking your partner for something that you want to do or something you need in your life because you feel like they're just going to say no anyway. So why bother asking? And that's actually self-sabotage because that's your attachment to the expected outcome. You don't know what's actually going to happen, right? So we self-sabotage in little ways every single day. So it's not these big things. It's actually very little micro decisions and micro actions that you're taking that are self-sabotage. When we look at the moon and we look at our connection, like I said, to our own inner rhythms and this outer rhythm around us, we can see where we might have greater patterns of self-sabotage and where maybe we're taking bold actions but not realizing it. I hear from so many people that they don't follow through with things, they don't have confidence, all of these things. Most of these people, though, when I get to talking to them, there is something that they're doing and they're doing it really, really well. Or there is an action that they're taking every single day and they're just not acknowledging it. So when we're working with the moon and we're tracking, like, what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm doing? We can find these energetic sweet spots where maybe we have that like one really bold day every lunar cycle where we do speak our truth. We do ask for what we want. We like do the thing that's the opposite of self-sabotage and make some momentum. And we could start to see these rhythms, we can better live our lives and prepare for these things that are going on around us or that we want to do. Now, if you're listening to this on the podcast, because this will go on our podcast, I invite you to check your emails from us if you're on our email list, because I have been sending out in the last few emails the link to our free Season of the Witch gifts. I can't say that word with the T at the end. Gifts. And in there is a printable lunar tracker. You can print it out. I have a digital copy on an iPad, so I can write on it on there. However works for you. You can draw your own. I am going to show it, though, on the screen for anybody watching on video. And this is a lunar tracker. So it's basically a circle broken down into parts each day of a lunar cycle. Now, those of you who are in Holistic Witchery or Enchanted Journey in those programs or are living your lunar year self-paced class, you have the full downloadable printable notebook where it's like the whole year plus all these extra printables to go with it. But anybody who wants the free tracker, you have access to that as well. Basically, what you do is at a new moon, you mark the date on your tracker. And this is where people get caught up. They get caught up and they self-sabotage by wanting to do it perfect and right. And there is no perfect or right way to fill this out. Each day over a lunar cycle, you can even just do this in a list in a notebook or in your phone, notes app, whatever you want to do. But each day, starting at a new moon, basically you make a note of your, how you're feeling that day, what steps you took towards your intention that day. Maybe it's just a note about what happened in your life that day. Maybe it's like maybe you share a great highlight and then something where you're like, this could use some improvement. You can also I track my menstrual cycle on mine. I will track communication with my family members. Like if I had a really tough communication with one of my kids or my husband, I'll track that on there. And at the end of a lunar cycle, you'll be able to see how you were in relation to the rhythm of the moon and your hormonal cycle if you're tracking that. If you do this like 3 months in a row, you'll start to get this evidence of patterns and you'll be able to see for yourself, goodness, I see in which part of a lunar cycle or my own hormonal cycle, I'm really self-sabotaging. Like I'm really reaching for something to help me out here, or I'm really standing in my own way. I'm lacking confidence on these days. And I see on this day, everything was really amazing and I was really bold, or I felt really good and had this great communication with my partner or whatever it is. And over time, you'll see these patterns. When you understand these patterns, this is when you can create in your life faster. And it's when you can switch from the habit of self-sabotage to one of creation and more confidence, because it's not always the fact that you don't know what you're doing. It's not always the fact that you aren't confident or can't do something. It could very well be just the energy of the time. I know personally over years and years and years of lunar tracking that at the new moon, I'm a little bit like down and out. I just don't feel very hyped up. Like everything feels a little slow and a little bit harder than it needs to be. But at a first quarter moon, oh my gosh, there is gas in my gas tank and I am 1,000 miles an hour and you can't stop me. And I have found that that's not entirely dependent on my hormonal cycle either. So at the moon phases, I definitely have that pattern. When I'm looking at my menstrual cycle and my hormones, I can see where I actually feel this like spike in frustration and kind of like leave me alone, I need my blanket at the end of the bleeding week, as opposed to some people it's during or at the beginning. And I saw that pattern too from tracking. So I can see where if my menstrual cycle is lining up with a new moon, that's not the time for me to start taking action to create something or try to manifest something, because I'm going to feel like everything is the worst. But I can also look though, like what's going on at the first quarter moon and what's lining up there, because that's when I feel super jazzed and ready to do anything. So for every person though, it is different because we are all different and we all relate to the energy of the lunar phases different, which is sort of like a bone to pick I have with moon books in general, or the idea of manifesting with the moon, because you're taught a rhythm of growth and release. And that is a great foundation rhythm, but not everybody relates to that rhythm in the same way. We are all different relating to those rhythms, depending on your astrological sign, depending on your hormonal cycle, as I said, depending on where you live in the world, and even the seasons can impact how you are relating to the moon phases. If you live somewhere like I do in Connecticut, where it gets very cold and very dark in the winter months, I mean, those new moon periods can be even darker, even like more, they can feel very constricting and like, there's no end to the darkness. If you live in Florida here in the US, it might not feel that constrictive because it's still sunny, it's still warm, you can still go outside. So depending where you are in the world, depending who you are, depending on your astrology, you can relate to the moon phases differently than these generic sort of foundation outlines for how the moon works, which is why I think it's so important to create a practice of lunar tracking. Even if you don't do it every day. I'm not perfect. There's some weeks that I sort of look back through my calendar and I backfill a few days. There's sometimes when I'm really on point and I do it every day. But really doing this will help you to stop your self-sabotage, because you're going to learn a heck of a lot about yourself along the way. All right, let's see here if there is anything that I can answer. Any questions coming up? I see one. Base how you respond yourself to the moon cycles rather than the what they, in quotes, say to do. Yes, I always say look at your own relationship to any energy and not the prescribed foundations of the energy. The thing about lunar cycles in particular is that, historically speaking, anthropologically speaking, folks worked with the lunar cycles as a method of keeping time. So this idea that, we have these specific phases for specific things, that's really more of a modern construct. And it's something that, humans just like us developed over time. And I love that the relationships of the moon phases to the different ways to use them, because it does give us this really great creation rhythm. And if you're a person who, I see for a lot of women who maybe don't menstruate anymore, who've had a hysterectomy, and for men in particular, people who are looking to kind of anchor in on a rhythm that's not within their body anymore, that's not very visible within their body, I should say, because there is a rhythm there, but one that's not like readily visible and apparent. Looking at the rhythm of the moon as you can learn it foundationally and as we teach it in our holistic witchery program, that's a great way to create rhythm in your life if you're looking for rhythm in your life, right? That's an amazing way to find rhythm. I have 2 young kids, and we even look at the moon phases when it comes to, we homeschool, so when it comes to their schooling and like what we're working on, how much time we're spending on the day doing schoolwork, right? As opposed to like some 2 periods of the lunar cycle, we do more and sometimes we pull back and we do less. So it is this rhythm that helps us to grow and reflect. And it's a beautiful built-in rhythm for us. And when you can understand your connection to that rhythm, that's where the real power lies. That's when you're like a superhuman creator, because it's really easy to get stuck in this thought of like, everybody else knows something I don't know. Everybody else can just manifest things. And that's not the case. Just learning about yourself and understanding this is a period of time where, I am not at my best self, and it's going to be really hard to get in the headspace to do something wild or speak my truth, versus understanding your relationship to the lunar phases and knowing like this is the time when I feel really bold and I'm not so afraid of failure and I can take these big actions and make stuff happen. So understanding that relationship, it gives you the grace too to love yourself unconditionally through the times when maybe you don't take the action and you realize like, hey, I'm just a human who also has a built-in rhythm. And here it is. Like, this is the time when I create. This is the time when I don't create. Rather than this constant like, oh, I'm trying to create things. I'm trying to do things. I'm trying to make my goals. I'm trying to live my intentions. We all have periods of time where our minds, our energy, our bodies are just like, nope, this is not that day. This is not that day for me. And the more you lunar track, the more readily available that information is to you, and the greater likelihood that you will step out of self-sabotage instead of living in a cycle of self-sabotage. Let's see here, just checking out if there's any other comments. I see over here in our app, we do have an app, those of you who might not be catching it there, where we host our classes and community. And I see some folks sharing that it's their intention to finally start their lunar tracker. I get it. It's one of those things that it really is a habit. And I can sit here and say this all day long, and I will tell you that it's not something that I do perfectly, lunar tracking. I don't do it every day of the week. And there are, in fact, entire lunar cycles that go by where I write like maybe the date on it, and then I just realize, oh goodness, what happened? The key is, though, is that I've been doing it imperfectly for years. I've never done, okay, I might have done it like a few times where I've done it every single day and I've really followed through. And it's imperfect, but I've been imperfect at it for years and years and years and years. And it's that imperfect collection of findings that have really helped me to learn about myself and see, how was this before I had children? How was it when I was pregnant? How was it post having children? And now that I'm 5 years out from my last kid and I'm perimenopausal and I have like all estrogen dominance. My hair's getting a little gray. Like, how is it now? How am I relating to the lunar phases now? Because for women in particular, the moon, our menstrual cycles typically are about the same period of time as the moon. Now, it's not the case for everybody. It's not the case for me. Mine is different from the moon days, which makes it very interesting because it's always changing per lunar cycle. But the moon it's associated with the zodiac sign of Cancer, which is like the nurturer. It's the Anna, my sister here, who's one of our, she is our astrology teacher along with Sarah and Nick. We've got a great astrology team. But Anna will tell you, if you fall off your bike, Cancer that's the one who's going to want to give you a Band-Aid. That's the person who's going to come over and give you a hug and wipe you off and want to give you a cookie. Say, are you okay? Make sure everyone's all right. And the moon is associated with Cancer in the zodiac. So women, I think a lot of us can relate to that energy of I must take care of everybody. Is everybody okay? I need to take care of everybody else first and myself later, which is why I think that for women in particular, understanding the energy of the moon is very powerful just because it does create that rhythm of reflection and that rhythm of taking action. Because if we're always trying to take action, we will exhaust ourselves. And if we're always just waiting around, reflecting, feeling like we're in a funk and can't do anything, we never move forward. And the moon reminds us that there's a rhythm to this. There's a time to move forward. There's a time to reflect. There's a time to move forward. There's a time to reflect. But as I said, we don't all relate to those energies the same. And it can change lunar cycle to lunar cycle based on your hormonal energy as well, which I experience as having a shorter cycle than the lunar cycle. So mine's always changing. It's always interesting. But if I know based on patterns, I can work on those self-sabotage things that I might be doing because I can see them coming a mile away. And again, to reiterate, I do not do this perfectly. There is no world in which I am perfectly tracking in a lunar cycle tracker every single day. And there's not one way that I do it. Some days it's my feelings. Some days it's a communication that I had. Some days it's just like a one-liner about what I did. It's different all the time for me, but it's this imperfect action over years that has really helped me to see myself and see how I relate to different lunar phases. Add the zodiac on there and what signs everything is in. Oh my goodness. The world is your oyster. But that's a topic for another day because that will just get us down a whole entire rabbit hole here. And what am I seeing over in our comments? Kim, the lovely Kim, who is in our programs, we just got to meet in Salem, Massachusetts. Your birthday is on the next new moon. Is that true, Kim? That is a very powerful time to start your lunar tracker. I did not look before I came on here when the next new moon is, but I'm thinking it's the 25th. Oh, it is. Yes, Tara is sharing that over here. It is on the 25th in Libra, the next new moon. So it's the perfect time to print this out and start thinking about what you might want to put on it. You could even start it at the full moon coming up. The full moon will be this weekend. Yeah. You could do 2 weeks starting on the full moon as well, and then switch to the new moon for the next lunar cycle. That's the other thing is, folks they really want to be perfect about it. You can certainly start a lunar tracker at any point in time. Any of the 4 core lunar phases, the new moon, the first quarter moon, the full moon, or the third quarter moon, would all be beautiful times to start a lunar tracker because each of the 4 core phases lasts 1 week. So the first 2 weeks of a lunar cycle, that's that growing portion where we might want to take more action, feel more like out there doing things. And the last 2 weeks is it's the waning half where we're releasing, we're resetting, we're resting. But within there, each of the 4 core lunar phases lasts 1 week. And then that builds up, obviously, to 4 weeks. Is asking where can I find the tracker. In our emails, the last, I think, 4 or 5 that I sent, there was a link for a free Season of the Witch gift link in each of the emails. And in there, click the link, you'll find the lunar tracker page. And today's free gift went up also. They're coming up on Tuesdays for the next few weeks. So if you have the link, go ahead and click it because you will find today's free gift as well. If you don't have the link, have no fear. I will be sending it out later today. For each of these Tuesday live streams that we're doing, it goes on the podcast afterwards, and we also write out a beautiful blog post to support it. The lovely Sarah Milne, who is she's one of our teachers, she's an astrologer, she's a writer, she's turning these into blog posts for us. So every Tuesday later on in the day, I'll email out the replay. The podcast episode is available there, as well as Sarah's beautiful blog post for you. And the Season of the Witch gifts I will put in that email that goes out later today as well. But I think it's been in the last 4 or 5 emails, or it was in 2 last week, at least 3 last week, I believe. And you can find it in there. Anywho, yeah, and Tuesdays is on there as well. All right, so that is some information for you on self-sabotage and lunar tracking highlights. Ask yourself what self-sabotage really is and see where you see it in your life, because self-sabotage is really, it's these micro actions and micro decisions. It's not what you would think is like, I think we think of self-sabotage and think it's maybe something like one big thing we do, or it's like very visible and apparent. It's really micro actions and micro decisions that we're making that are self-sabotage. And often I think we justify them as necessary. Which is always a red flag to me that there's self-sabotage afoot. And working with lunar tracking can help you to see where that might be happening for you and better align your expectations with what it looks like to create things in your life. All right, y'all, that is it for today. We have a fun announcement coming for you tomorrow, all about Magic Week and registration for that. So be sure to keep an ear out, keep eyes open, all those things for that announcement tomorrow. And until next time, I hope that you all have a very, very enchanted rest of your day ahead.